شوف الكون سبحان من حلا. يلا سيب بصمتك، يلا يلا سيب لمستك، يلا شوف الكون سبحان من حلا. يلا سيب بصمتك، يلا يلا سيب لمستك، يلا شوف الكون سبحان من حلا.
Welcome back. You're still watching Nile Cruise, and moving on now to a very interesting topic and more about the Islamic art and a project that shows a conversation between the designer and craftspeople. Will be joined by a professor of applied arts who initiated a research project in collaboration with the Museum of Islamic Art and the Sultan Foundation. Designers and graduate students are working on the problem of understanding and rethinking Islamic art within a contemporary context. The work is inspired by the collection in the Museum of Islamic Art and Mamluk artifacts in the Qaitbay area. We're joined now with Dr. Frederick Best, the Professor of Applied Arts. I'd like to thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Very pleased to meet you.
Dr. Frederick, if we start from the very beginning, art is a mixture between a talent and cleverness. So, can you tell us more about this kind of profession?
It's probably like sport. There's maybe 40% talent and the rest is hard work. And that's what any university is about. It's about training and it's about learning and giving our students skill. So part of our project, the workshops project here is to give our students manual skills as well as theoretical skills, because we believe that that for a designer to make a successful design, they need to understand the material with and the discipline and the history of this material, and they can only really get this by interacting with the material themselves. So this is why we have a series of workshops that enable the students to work with ceramics, with plaster, with modeling and molding techniques, with printing techniques, with typography, with bookbinding, with woodwork, so they can have an experience of a wide series of materials and craft traditions.
Yes, and this part of the conversation between the designer and craftspeople, that's really interesting. And how are you planning to bridge this? Or maybe leverage the skills of craftspeople with designers and blending those?
Firstly, I think we should maybe try and look at what is a university like this about, a German university in Cairo. So I think it should not be about importing foreign traditions and foreign values. It should be a place of dialogue and a place of exchange of ideas. That's why somebody like me chooses to come here, because I'm teaching something, but I'm also learning something. So I'm bringing something from my experience and from my background, but I'm also taking on new ideas and values. So one thing that I've noticed here is there's a kind of disparity between values around associated with craft. So on the one hand, we have the most amazing craft traditions alive on the streets of Cairo. They're alive in a way that they aren't anymore in the West, in Europe or in the USA. On the other hand, we have a kind of division in society between people who work with their heads and people who work with their hands. Egypt is a very traditional country. It's very aware of its traditions. and on the other hand, it's also a modern nation that's striving for modernity. This university encapsulates these two extremes. So we have a modern industrial park, and we also have craft workshops. And what we're trying to do, is cross this gap. So we're looking at the traditions, we're trying to understand the traditions, and we're trying to understand, for example, how Islamic tradition, which is one of the projects that you mentioned, has always been a process of continual development and acceptance of new ideas from the outside, creation of these new ideas. So if we look at the history of Egypt, we have the Fatimid era, we have the Mamluk era, we have the Ottoman era. So these were all eras where people come in from the outside and bring in new ideas, and these ideas are taken on board and become part of a flow and exchange of ideas. So if we look at Islamic art, we're thinking about not copying a motif from the past, but understanding how this tradition developed and how we can continue to think it and develop it in the present day. So to come back to the question of handcrafts and modern technologies, we're looking at handcrafts, we're working with handcrafts to understand design processes, to understand why a particular object, a particular chair or lamp or table has a particular form. And at the same time, we're looking at how can we make this today. We might choose to work with handcrafts people because they exist, they're here, and the infrastructures are very well developed, and we can make things using handcrafts comparatively cheaply if we compare to the European situation. At the same time, we're also using modern technologies. We're using CNC routers, we're using laser cutters, we're using digital programs. So we're interested in combining modern technologies with traditional technologies.
Very interesting.
Dr. Frederick, the Islamic art is a unique kind of art, and it displays every culture back then. But at the same time, as an Egyptian and as an Arab, it should be everywhere, but unfortunately this kind of art is fading away. So from your own point of view, why is that?
Well, we're in a process of globalization. So we're in a process of influences from all over the world, crossing over, interchanging, mixing. This is something we can't stop. And I think there's a danger of trying to save something from the past, because as soon as you try and save something, you're freezing it. So the process of looking at Islamic art is, for me, more about heritage. It's about understanding where we come from, but not ignoring where we are now. And it's also, I think we're dealing with questions of identity. And the whole Arab world is in a process of, we're now in a post-colonial period, we're in a post-Ottoman period. So Egypt is in a process of redefining itself. Egypt has a very rich heritage, a long history. So there's a pharaonic identity, there's an Islamic identity, there's a kind of colonial identity that we see in a lot of the architecture in downtown Cairo. And now we're in a period of new departure. So Egyptian identity is about all of these things. Egypt, of course, doesn't want to remain insular. It's reaching out to the rest of the world. So the process of identity is a complex one, and it's one that's always in a state of flux. Something I've noticed in working with the students here is, I haven't been here so long, but we spend a lot of time trying to teach them from our tradition, for example, of drawing. In the West, we have a tradition of figurative drawing, of representing the world as we see it. We notice here that the students have a lot of problems with this because they come from a different tradition. They haven't been taught drawing this way in schools here, in art classes at schools. In the past semester, we offered a project which was to look at the tradition of khayamia. This is something very Egyptian, these decorative textile objects that we see. And this is something that has evolved. The first khayamia were sewn out of pieces of different colored textiles. Then they were made using printing, screen printing technologies. This is a relatively new technique. So we looked, what can we do with khayamia? And we printed khayamia using the facilities that we have here on the campus. So we made wooden blocks for printing them using CNC technologies. We printed them by hand, so using kind of 19th century or old technologies, to produce something that is very new. And what really impressed me in this project was the ease with which the Egyptian students produced patterns and designs. So really drawing from their own tradition, something that's in their veins. At the same time, of course, we were looking at designs in the Museum of Islamic Art. So if you look at the khayamia we made, you can see elements that come from the tradition of arabesque. You can see a lot of elements that come from Kufi script. But it's very new, the way that this has been done. Egyptians love pattern. If you walk around the streets, you see icons from the modern world. I recently, walking down a street, I saw a woman wearing a very decorative piece of cloth, and it was covered with Apple logos. Yeah, so we have a sign or a symbol from modernity, yeah, that's entering into something that looks traditional. And if you go into the Museum of Islamic Art, you see this. You see how the Fatimids, when they entered Egypt, they wanted to make themselves popular. So they reintroduced figuration into Islamic art, something completely new at the time. Yeah.
Right. Finally, I'd like to ask you about some of the redefinition. You mentioned redefining some of the Egyptian art and the stages that Egypt has passed through. Do you think at this, modern life, would Egypt be coming with new type of art that is blended, that would live for the rest of the upcoming centuries, like like the Islamic art, something that is modernized but Egyptian?
I mean, this is a very interesting question, and it's something we're dealing with and we're struggling with, because it's dangerous. We don't want to make things that are backward looking, because the interest in this dies immediately. Yeah. And we're living in the 21st century. At the same time, they're particular to regions and to cultures. So if we think about Italian design, we think about elegance. We think about clothing, fashion, and in product design, we think about a particular facility of use, maybe an elegance of design. If we think about Germany and German design, the cliches, are maybe the excellence of manufacture, the excellence of craftsmanship, of modern industries. Maybe now also we're thinking about environmental issues, about green issues. If we think about English design, we're thinking about tradition and traditional values. So I think if we're making something Egyptian, we're in a process of looking at this. What is Egyptian? We don't have the answers. So we're more on a journey of discovery, and that's really the
interesting part
thing
always.
about it. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Frederick, would like to thank you very much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you with us.
And thank you so much for your interest.
Thank you, sir. Now we are moving to a quick break, so please stay tuned.